This podcast is a Uniting Heart and Soul production and was recorded on land that was stolen nearly 250 years ago. Filthy Hope was conceived and dreamt on Gadigal and Birrabirragal country, and we acknowledge these peoples as the traditional owners of these lands, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We here at Filthy Hope pay homage to the traditions of storytelling when we share stories on this podcast. Hello and welcome back to Filthy Hope, a podcast from Uniting Heart and Soul in Wallara, where we dive into the grey spaces where Jesus, life and culture intersect. I'm your host, Jonty Cornford, Creative Director here at Uniting Heart and Soul, and with me, of course, is the Rev Vanessa Williams-Henke, Senior Pastor at Uniting Heart and Soul. For our very first episode back in the new year, we're sharing our conversation we had with the Rev Simon Hansford, who is the moderator of the Uniting Church in Australia. We had a ball recording this one, and we hope you enjoy it. Welcome to the show. Ness, how are you?
I'm really excited today.
Yeah,
We've
same.
had a shit of a start, but I'm really excited.
Which we'll get to. We have a fantastic guest with us today. Moderator Simon Hansford. How are you?
Great to be here. Thank you.
Hang on, can you do the clap track now? Do the clapping thing.
I'll add it in.
And the crowd go wild.
I'm very used to that. That's great.
See, what you don't know, Ness, is if I'll just leave that in without any sound.
Yeah, that's
With the spontaneousness.
That's right. For people that may not know who you are, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the moderator of the Uniting Church in New South Wales and the ACT, which means I'm kind of like the minister for the whole church in that space, which means I'm sort of involved in a role of leadership and pastoral oversight and prophetic ministry and encouragement in that space. Yeah.
Gosh, that sounds really posh. When people say to me that are non-Uniting Church people, I say, "Oh, Simon, our moderator." They say, "What's a moderator?" And when I describe you, I just say, "Well, he's like our New South Wales ACT Pope."
Yeah. Just say he's stunningly important.
That's what I say. I say I bend and kiss his ring off.
Yeah, that's right.
Something like that.
That's right. Chafing. It's a lovely
There's a high bar of fashion set by the Pope, though.
Oh, we do good costuming.
I was at an ecumenical function the other day, and all the Orthodox guys turned up, so they're all in all their gear, and I wore a collar and a jacket, and they went, "Oh, dressing down today, are we?" I'm like, seriously, guys, and they're in the hats and the gear, and they go, great guys, great conversation. Yeah, so.
I love those outfits.
We had fresh fruit for morning tea, and the Ukrainian Orthodox guy said, "Oh, this is for food in the shower because it ruins your beard. The mango ruins your beard." Great guy. Very, very good guy.
Love it.
Lovely guy. Yeah.
That's so funny. So we're recording this just before Christmas. This will be coming out in the new year. Just for context, if we reference anything that seems a little bit like it's a couple of months old, that's because it probably is. But before we dive in, let's do Vent Central.
Yes.
For people that haven't heard this podcast before, Vent Central is where one of us, or all of us, depending on if we get a roll going, just gets to rant and rave about something that's been annoying us. So Ness.
Oh, am I up first?
No. I need you to do it. So you may not know,
yeah.
and for Simon, there's a little thing that Ness always does that we've had people, even guests, say it's their favourite part of the podcast. So go.
Jonty, it's time to play the music.
Usually she has the foresight to move away from the microphone before she screams.
I wasn't aware there were cultural highlights. But now
Did you see my gold filling?
Well, in the edit?
Yeah, it's really good.
So Ness, do you want to go first?
Sure. So Simon's coming in to do the podcast today, and I'm really excited. A bit nervous last night. Had nervous diarrhea. A bit nervous about the whole thing.
Way too much information off the bat.
I'm just shaking my head right now.
Radically honest.
That's right, yeah.
I said, can I be totally authentic? And you bastard said yes. So anyway.
I've forgotten.
Yes, thank you, boys. So anyway, bit nervous, bit keyed up, excited about this. Get up super early, very, very early to get myself to location way in heaps of time. Wanted to get all my admin stuff done ahead of time and have the coffees piping hot for Simon's arrival. Looking all professional and like I was really chilled and relaxed about the whole thing. And I get up and I go out to my car. Bye, babe. See you. He says, bye, honey. Good luck. Have a great day. I've got a flat tyre. Oh, shit. Lucky I've got plenty of time up my sleeve. Race into Rob and I say, Rob, can you fix my tyre? He says, yes. Can I finish my poo first? I said, yes.
There's a lot of poo in this story already.
Yes, absolutely. And so he comes down, he changes my tyre with me, and we do this joint tyre changing routine. And then he puts the spare tyre on the car. And the tyre's flat. The disappointment. And he says, don't worry, because he's a Harley rider, and he gets out his emergency Harley pumper-upper and he sets that up and he gets my tyre pumped up. That consumed all my extra time that I had allocated to being calm and relaxed for when Simon arrives.
And your allocation was smooth.
I had zero smooth on my arrival. I burst through the door like a hurricane.
Can confirm.
Can confirm. That's it was like that. So, yes. So my vent central is, play the music now, Jonty. Mm-hmm. My vent central is when your spare tyre is flat.
Yeah, it's a good parable too. You got a parable in there.
Oh,
That's right.
Do you think?
Fantastic.
Oh.
Yeah, you can work with that.
Oh. Where would you go with that? I wouldn't know where to go straight off.
When you look for your emotional reserves and you go there and it's actually down. Oh. Nice.
That's right.
See, I should be a preacher.
I reckon you've got a gig.
You've got a future in the church, I
I
reckon.
know, I reckon. People look at me and nod.
I love it.
While we're on that, have we told your husband Rob's Harley Davidson related story about selling the Jeep on the podcast before? Is that something you want to share or no? I can edit this out if not.
I probably can't say who it is, but I can give the story if you think it's appropriate.
Sure. I just think it's such a crazy story. Up to you.
I just want to say too, before I forget, that that most Harley drivers wouldn't refer to a pumper-upper. I think if they were being authentic.
A pumper-upper.
Pop that in there.
You know why the Harley came about? Do you know that story?
No.
So we both ride bikes. I sold mine to buy 2 new garage doors because I just decided I was done with riding because it's a bit scary out there on the roads. And I said to Rob, I think he was in his early 40s, and he said, I really want a Harley. And I said, well, you need to go and get a Harley because I'm a smart wife. And I said, as long as, and he refers to her as a she, like the bike is a she. I don't know what that is. And I said to him, I'll be happy in your 40s with your midlife crisis as long as you're only throwing your leg over her than some hot blonde with great boobs. So with that, he went and got himself the biggest bloody Harley money could buy.
Nice.
Yeah, and he's been riding her ever since. Yeah, happy family, happy wife, happy life.
That's right. Yeah.
That's how it goes.
I've always been terrified by motorbikes. I don't know. Like, it's just not something that I'm going to dip my toe into.
Yeah, it is scary. Yeah. It is quite terrifying.
I think living in the country, your motorbike thing is very different. And then you come to the city and think, oh, Lord, I couldn't do it here.
Yeah.
Country is very different. But yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. That's lovely. Yes.
He sold his bike to...
Car.
his car. So anyway, we'll edit around that.
Lovely.
Yeah, so if people listening, you don't get to hear probably one of the great stories.
It's one of those really good stories.
Yeah, come and talk to us if you want to hear it. If Ness feels comfortable
to me for
sharing
prayer
it.
and I'll tell you all about it.
That's right. What about you, Simon? Have you got anything?
Yeah, I was going much more spiritual and Christian and nicely. It's nice, but I mean, I was just going to say I had this fascinating conversation, which I have a lot of the time, where we're talking about an idea yesterday, but getting a new idea going, and there's this person, and there are people around like this, And the first part of the conversation is the person who says, I can see holes in that. And they just chip at it and chip at it and chip at it. And you go, look, just for the moment, assume the idea has some merit and let's build it, you know. And I think that's the thing is there's this, and it happens everywhere, because not just the church, but this conversation where there's an idea about how we might try the thing differently.
Yep.
And it isn't the argument of, we've tried it before, it didn't work, though that's common too. It's just the person who wants to find the problem before we actually think, could this thing be a good thing?
Yeah.
You know, and it drives me to distraction because it happens in all kinds of conversations. But when it happens, when you get when you get excited, for you very rarely, you get really excited and you think, here's an idea, and let's just brainstorm about what the idea might mean, rather than do the detail thing immediately. Let's just talk about the big picture about how we might serve or encourage or whatever. And the person goes, that would never work. And you go, and I just want to walk out of the room.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the problem solving. I want to get into the what's the picture?
Life-giving.
What's the picture? You know, that's the
what can we do here?
Yeah. And how might this happen?
Yeah.
And I'm happy for all the details to be taken out of my hands entirely, as long as the idea has some airing. And in the end, of course, it mightn't work. But let's start positive. Let's start hopefully. You know, and often in inter-church conversations, the people who are supposed to be people of faith often look for all the reasons things won't work, rather than saying, what do we have in common that's life-giving here? How do we build from that? So that's my spiritual clergy-based beef.
Because you are a cup overflowing guy and I'm a cup overflowing girl.
Yes.
And I think when we think big picture like that and flow over with the possibilities of what can be done in the church, and when it's received by wet blanket, there's nothing worse than that.
And then you self-doubt, you think, hold on. And I think, hold on a second, this person's saying this stuff for a number of reasons, but the difficulty is, and this is the problem with some of the roles I'm in, is the same person will be the wet blanket at every opportunity.
Yeah, right.
You know, why things can't work, and then you realise, that's why we're in the same spot now. You know, and look, I need to say, by and large, my conversations are incredibly positive. But yesterday was one of those days where you had the whole, let's pile some bricks on this, and you know.
Yeah.
Do they forget who we worship? All things are possible, don't we say that?
It's funny, but it just fascinates me how that stuff seeps in, you know.
Always.
Yeah. I've talked to Ness a fair bit about, this isn't my theory, I heard it somewhere else and I've sort of co-opted it, this idea of edge theory, which is where when you're brainstorming or coming up with ideas, there's the kernel of the idea, which is the root of where anything will come out of.
Yeah.
And for it to be, where edge theory comes in is you blow that idea up to its most ridiculous blue sky thing, and then you pare it back until it's just within visibility, as opposed to starting from the root idea and edging and working forwards. You shoot way beyond your capacity and then bring it back to just where it is only just within your capacity. But you can't do that if, when you're talking about the root idea, someone's immediately just like, that won't work. It just takes all the wind out your sails. And
sometimes the reasons are driven from their crises, but it doesn't help when you're actually sitting, let's just have an idea. Edge theory, I'll have a think about that.
That's why we work so well together, brother. Because we blow things up, don't we? And you often help me bring it back.
That's right. That's the edge
which
theory.
is a really good thing. We're great because I can often go too big and too out there, and you just help moderate me. And we've got a really good balance.
In one of my placements, my early placements, I had a group of people who I'd have a new idea every week, and they'd come and they'd say, "Oh, look, that's brilliant, but it's never going to work," and name why. And they were a great group because half the time they wanted things to work. But so I trusted that group, and that actually meant when they said, "Oh no," it wasn't a negative "oh no," it was actually a realistic "oh no,"
and you could hear it.
Yeah, and they'd say to me, "Oh, that's brilliant. Oh, we can't do that right now. Put it on the shelf or whatever." But it was a great group to be part of. It was like a brainstorming, not controlling, but channeling Simon kind of conversation. It was really good.
Because there's a level of trust that needs to happen in both directions. Where you understand that criticism of an idea then isn't like a personal criticism.
Oh, that's right.
Because that's where a lot of that becomes really difficult and conflict starts to happen is, I say, no, Ness, that idea is terrible. This is an example. And Ness might go, oh, well, he thinks that idea is terrible, so therefore he thinks that all ideas that I come up with are terrible. So, no. There's trust that we're just talking about the idea, removed from who we are.
And when he does that, I've got a song that goes with it. So when he does that, and I've got this great thing,
This is news to me.
I often sing this thing. I go like this. And you could probably play the real thing, but I'll say it now. But it's probably better if you play the real one, and it goes like this. Okay, so you play it now, but it goes like this. Shot through the heart, and you're to blame, Jonty.
This is news to me.
A bit of glam rock always helps us.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm so funny.
That's right. So, we have a really great opportunity to have a little powwow with you about what's going on in the church at the moment. So, I think the first thing I wanted to toss your way is we're recording this right at the end of the year.
Yep.
What are some highlights that you've seen? I guess let's talk Uniting Church, but just broadly, what have you seen God doing amongst your communities this year?
What I find fascinating is the church maintains this myth about itself, the whole church, that God's stuff happens in the church, and it's a myth. The reality is, the Christmas story and the Easter story proclaim this. God's stuff happens on the edges, not in the middle. And I remember years ago we were conducting a service for World AIDS Day, making my first placement, and the Catholic priest was preaching, fantastic guy. And he said, whenever the church arrives somewhere to care, immediately it becomes the middle. So the church has to keep moving to the edge, which I found really, really helpful. And that was in the early days of the AIDS crisis in the rural community. And so people were coming into this service, sitting at the back very quietly in the dark because they didn't want to be seen and known and stuff, but they were praying for their family or whatever. So in those days, it was a critical thing for a priest to get up there and say, actually, we're about moving to the edges. So so just a few weeks ago, I was at the Art from the Heart of the Cross exhibition, which is the artworks sponsored for the MSIC, for the Medically Supervised Injecting Centre in the Cross. And about 145 artists put artworks in. A lot of them are in recovery. Some of them aren't in recovery. Some of them are just friends of people in recovery who use the MSIC. And I was at this space, and there were, quite seriously, there were people there who had just come off the street. Yep. There were billionaires walking through. I saw a couple of people. There were stunningly wealthy people. A range of leaders and servants in the community, ministers and non-ministers, a whole bunch of folk were there. And they were there because this Art from the Heart of the Cross is about much more than an exhibition. It's about a whole lot of things, about people's lives and struggles and celebrations and hopes and that sort of thing. And the art was auctioned off. And I put in a couple of bids, and we'll see how it works out. It's a blind auction.
Yep.
But for me, it's one of those things where you're actually in this space thinking, this is where God's at work in the world. And this person came up to me early on and said, I just want to say thank you for being here. And whenever I hear you speak, you give me hope and a whole lot of my friends hope. And I thought, now, that's the kind of sermon review you want to hear.
Totally.
It's that when someone who actually needs to hear hope and out of the blue comes and talks to me about it, and that's not about me, it's about him. And I think to myself, if the church is able to do that, where people who are told hope isn't yours to have, actually hear and receive it, then I think we're doing our job a bit,
100%.
And so there are those kind of moments that have happened a few times recently, and people like Marianne Jonesy from the MSIC are just fantastic people. And but I was talking to one guy who's now, I guess I'd say fully recovered, like in the sense that he's always going to be recovering, but I mean he's off the gear and going really well. A lovely guy. I've met him before when he was still battling. And he said to me, I go back once a month to the MSIC because it's my community.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, this is the lie too, is that it's only about treatment or it's only about injecting. It's actually about community and caring for each other. And I thought to myself, this is a story that's worth repeating because this is where I hear the gospel echoes, the spiritual echoes of God's presence in the world. Because, now, without harping on about Christmas too much, because this is going to be after Christmas, But you see God born at the edge of things, in the mess of things, in the chaos of things, and you go, actually, if God was going to be born anywhere in Sydney, it'd be in the cross, it'd be in places where it's battling, that's where God would be turning up. It wouldn't be in the elite places because God doesn't show up there. And I think in the scriptural stories, God shows up in the spaces that we least expect. So that's my Art from the Heart, the cross story. But I've observed really important things happening in a range of places. I mean, I work with the schools a bit, and there have been some struggles in the schools in the last 12 months, and how I watch these teachers who are obviously educating kids, but educating them entirely, rather than just about teaching maths or science or history or whatever. They're actually talking about being better people and learning to be whole people. And when things don't work, you can see the teachers really upset, not because these kids have blotted their copybook, but because these kids are not who they hoped they would be.
Wow.
And I think there are those sort of evidences of our faculty and staff and teachers working really well for these kids, and I really am hopeful for them. I was just thinking about I've been some places recently where being part of worship, and you sort of go there expecting a 4-hymn sandwich and the normal stuff, and then you get the worship, and the worship's often fine, but you meet the people and they're doing really good things. They are doing just simple community stuff that's caring for people in the community, or just turning up and showing up. And I know that sounds fairly mundane, but when someone's battling, the mundane's pretty good. Someone turning up with a meal and a conversation, that's fantastic stuff. So you can go for things like the injecting centre where the work is
extraordinary,
phenomenal, and you go, wow. And you look at stuff like that's as simple as just turning up, and you think, they're good stories too.
100%.
Yeah.
It's God in action, isn't it?
I had this encounter with, of all places, and I think this sort of speaks to a little bit what you're talking about, at a metal show. And I'd spoken to the singer, let's call it, the guy that yells into a microphone for this band a couple of times before, and came up to him and said g'day after the show, and told me a little bit of, because we've had this ongoing story of just like catching up with each other and reaffirming each other's, because he's been through some tough things as well as I have, and he said to me this thing that I've been thinking about since, which I had heard before, but kind of resonated with me a lot more because of who it came from. Is like, all you have to do is show up and the Spirit will work. Like, it's not actually, the burden isn't on us often to do the work.
Yes.
We just need to be present and show up and allow the Spirit to work.
Yeah. And I think that's actually I very rarely talk about heresy, but one of the heretical things I hear is people talking about it like, it's up to us to do this thing. And actually, as far as I'm concerned, God can do what God likes. He wants us to be involved. He loves us being involved. But the sense that God requires my hands to get the job done, I think it doesn't. And that actually then frees us up to be who we can be in this space, just to turn up and be faithful. The pride of me likes the idea of me saving the whole church, which is a waste of my time, a waste of God's. But the reality of me is to say, how am I faithful? How do I turn up? How do I actually pay attention? How do I and to look at the small things? And I don't mean small in terms of judgment, small in terms of how the world would say, like, that's not worth your time. And I think, well, often that is worth my time. So
Yeah, something that resonated as well, just when you were talking about the injection centre was, and I wish I could remember where I heard this and who said this to me, but it stuck with me to such a degree. Whenever institutions or individuals start drawing lines and borders in the name of Jesus, Jesus is invariably on the other side of that line.
Yeah, it's interesting that I was talking to an old farmer, this is years ago, it's an old story I've told before, and it was from way out west, like hundreds and hundreds of kilometres out west, and he talked about you people on the coast, meaning Dubbo on the coast. That's how far west he was. And he was talking about you people on the coast. You farm with fences, he said. You farm with fences. At where we are, we farm with water holes.
Wow.
Interesting.
He said so rather than constraining your beasts, they know where the life is. They come and find the water. And I think about that in terms of the church. At our best, we're a waterhole-based church. People come because they get their thirst quenched here. They find life here. They find themselves actually offered hope here. And that old story about sharing of faith is as one bigger to another bigger way to find bread. Yeah, it's the same thing. The idea of that. There's a waterhole here, and you invite a friend not because it's showy. It's because that's where life is found.
Yeah.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Talking of water holes, can I go there?
Let's do it.
I just want to ask you about, I watch you on Facebook. I'm a bit of a stalker, and I've seen you, I think it was last weekend, you were at Dandaloo.
Dandaloo and Nyngan, yeah.
Yeah. And can you talk to us about the bush, because you're a bushie?
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about the plight of the people and your people out in Tamworth and neighbouring areas and what they're actually dealing with? Because for us, we watch it on the news, Simon, but I don't think we actually get a really good handle on what's going down out there.
Yeah, I think, there's a whole lot of things, obviously, because it's a community, there's a whole lot of things going down out there, and some people, for example, right now, as we're speaking right now, the Murray's flooding down South Australia and it's causing a bit of chaos. At the same time, the environmentalists want to say really helpfully, it's actually going to clean the Murray out and open the mouth of the Murray. That'll be really good. So there are some really positive things going on as well.
Wow.
But if your house is in the way, your farm's in the way, mate. And so I was out with Nyngan and Dandaloo, which is if you know your western part of New South Wales, you head western Dubbo through Dandaloo, you went through Trangie and Narromine out to Dandaloo, and then further west out to Tottenham and Nyngan. And they've had some serious amounts of rain through there and serious amounts of water, and the ground's quite full, so when it rains each time, it just runs now. And what's happened out there is a whole lot of farms who the housing hasn't been damaged so much, some of them has, but the crop's been smashed. And so if you've got to get a perspective, putting a crop in on a decent sized place out there would be over $1 million to put a crop in. When you lose the whole thing, that's a lot of cash to lose, and the inputs are considerable. So costs because of COVID and Ukraine war and stuff, a lot of the costs of putting a crop in are very expensive. Diesel costs a lot of money, a whole lot of things. But so there's a lot of farmers out there who are going to have a hard season this year and had a hard season with flooding last season.
Yeah.
So there are those challenges, but the extra on top of the pile is places like Eugowra who have just been smashed. Like the entire town got smashed. All the farmers, the town got, people use the words like wiped out, not in terms of saying the community was wiped out, but the actual properties were just smashed.
Infrastructure.
And phenomenal walls of water going through there. The Herald talked about a 1 in 1,000 year flood. I mean, what the hell does that mean in terms of 1 in 1,000 year? But I mean, an extraordinary flood. And the comments in the papers have been, they mightn't even get any insurance for it at all because it's a flood. And those sort of costs are there. And so for a small community like Eugowra and surrounding communities, even the bigger community like Orange and the larger towns, the costs are going to be extraordinary. And we've heard this with Lismore up the coast from a couple of years ago and down the south coast. I mean, they haven't rebuilt yet from those places. So the ongoing challenge of what's it mean to be a human being in those spaces, what's it mean to be in community, what's it mean... Well, for example, the Uniting Church coordinates disaster response chaplaincy in those places. So we do the fires, we do the drought, we do the flooding. Just being there is important to turn up, but to know that the chances are if you had your house smashed in Eugowra, you might be out of a house for a couple of years at least before anything happens. And if you can't afford to build your new house because you have no insurance, would you build in Eugowra? I mean, all those phenomenally hard questions about what's it mean to be in community. And I think what we've learned, and it's going to be a bit of a space jump for you, but what we've learned during COVID, when we worked from home or did things from home, as convenient as that might have been, the need for being in community is so incredibly valuable. And Eugowra or the smaller towns around there, Kukumidjara, Bidjarabong, those sort of little towns, little villages, they thrive on community. And for that to be smashed in such a way means not only do you lose your home and your property, which is devastating enough, but you then lose
all your people.
And how do you orient yourself to that, especially when, there was a couple talking in the paper yesterday saying, we'd bought this place upon our retirement to be here, we are committed to this community, and now we don't know what to do, we're living in a caravan, and we can't afford to rebuild. And so that doesn't matter whether you're in Bidjarabong or Eugowra or the middle of Sydney, they can't afford to rebuild full stop. So what do you do? And I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I'm just simply saying the phenomenal community costs are there as well. And just to think about people down the Murray right now as we're talking, but I know that there are people in Condobolin and Trundle and people in Orange and Eugowra and a range of places that are really battling in Cowra. It's a really challenging time, and the great difficulty for us, if we take climate change as seriously as we need to, is this is normal now. We're going to be in this space. If they stopped all the greenhouse gases now, today, the effects of this stuff are with us for 50 years to 100 years. We're in this now. We're in this game now. And what that means for us, to use yours and my trade, what's it mean for us to be in the church in this space offering hope? What's it mean for us to talk about hope when everything has hit the fan, everything's hit the fan, then is a really hard question. And let's say, I know I'm talking a lot now, I apologise, but let's say, for example, we provide a whole pile of housing in Western Sydney and you live in Eugowra. Do you want to up sticks and move to Western Sydney where there's nice houses? I mean, do you want it? I mean,
where's your people? You want to be where your people are.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the challenge for us is that so many questions that we hear in the media and in politics and in the social stuff are those functional questions, and functional is important, about where's a house to live in. But if the question's about where's my community, where's my family, what would I rather do, they're large questions. And the COVID question about, I can work from home, but who builds you up socially? Who do you talk to? Who do you hold hands with? And we laugh in our office about the incidental conversation. So you have the meeting and then you walk into the lift and you're talking about how pissed off you were about so-and-so in the meeting. On Zoom, you don't have those conversations. You don't have the building relationship stuff.
That's
and so where's the community stuff where all those things, your cup of coffee conversations that you have, and they're really valuable. And often we find with people who've been in to hell and back in flooding or fires or whatever, they say the valuable thing wasn't the solution, it was the person who turned up and just listened to them.
Yeah.
Who just listened. Because your house is burnt down, you know there's no solution around the corner. So you just want someone to say, in this space, you matter.
Yeah. Shit, you're having a rough time, mate.
Yeah.
Here's a lasagna.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And we give out these little credit cards, $100 credit cards, which in the scheme of things is nothing. But when you've got nothing, $100 is the thing.
You know the first thing I think of when you say that? Yeah. If that was my situation, I just put myself immediately when you said that into that scope, and I thought that would buy tampons for my daughters.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Buy deodorant and tampons and fresh knickers.
Yeah.
And that's where my brain immediately went.
Yep.
And that would be gold in that moment.
And you're thinking, I haven't got to worry about that bit now.
Yes, that's right, because that's critical.
Yeah, because often there's food. There's food. You go, people are feeding you, but it's just that thing where you go, I've just been flooded out and I have no clothes.
No. Yeah. That's right.
And I remember at the end of the Lismore flooding, or at the end, in the middle of the Lismore flooding chaos, people were saying you can apply for these grants online. Well, my computer was in the flood. My phone was in the flood. What am I applying online with? You know, this whole conversation. And in no way am I being, a troglodyte by saying this, but I mean, when now everything's online, suddenly if you haven't got an online thing, you're done.
Yeah.
You can't do anything anymore. And there was a thing on in ABC's 7:30 last night about rural towns losing their ATMs and losing their banks, and people go, well, you just go to the ATM. Yeah, but if it's in the post office that's closed after 5 o'clock, you don't get to the ATM.
No.
You drive 100 k's to the ATM. So, I mean, that sort of things. But I'm just coming back to the conversation about the disaster. I want to be really clear. The farmers that I was talking to on the last weekend, would not want sympathy. They'd want acknowledgement. Yep. These people aren't complaining. They're just saying this is the world. And these people are resilient in every kind of way. I've known a lot of them for 30 years. But they're also aware that there are a whole lot of things that happen as a consequence of this that they get airbrushed out of the story a lot of the time.
Yeah.
They're there for the moment.
Yep.
But the consequences of the flooding in Eugowra, that's for years. It'll be for years. And you ask about the fires down the South Coast 3 years ago.
Yep.
Have they been rebuilt yet?
No. No, they have not.
It's hard.
I was at Orange on the weekend, and my dad lives in Orange, and he was saying that there was a whole lot of displaced people from the flooding that have been relocated to Orange. Yeah. And I wonder how long that's for, and how long is that sustainable? And they've totally been separated from their community and their support structures and all this stuff.
Yeah, and I think this is the larger question, is that we ask, once again, I'm not being a nerd by saying this, but I mean, we ask these really important questions. How do we house these people? How do we clothe these people?
Yep.
But the critical question deep underlying that is how do we build community for these people and give them life-giving relationships in this crisis time of their lives?
Well, they need those things the most.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's like saying, I'm not having to go at anybody. I'm just saying that's the core question, and often that's where the church, let's be more generous, people of faith come into that space and say, the Sikh volunteers who just come and bring food.
Yeah.
There's no strings, there's nothing flash going on. They just provide food and they say, here's a curry. Yeah. Great food, nourishing food, high quality food, here you go, no strings.
Yep.
Yeah.
And people go, so I've got a full belly, I can think better if my belly's full,
Yeah, that's right.
There's a really confronting idea that was introduced to me a little while ago that applies in a few different contexts, but I think has been just resonating off the wazoo in my head right now. Sometimes, like we talk about the gospel as being good news, sometimes that's the last thing that people want to hear. Yeah. And you can apply that to any situation with trauma or disaster or whatever. Going up to someone that just needs dinner or a house or a fresh set of undies and saying it's okay because Jesus loves you and one day you'll because there's an element of when that's done really poorly that's saying don't worry about this place because you get to leave and you get to go with Jesus in this other place when that's done really poorly, and that is so unhelpful. And I feel really strongly that showing being the gospel manifest in the world, I think is you can do that more strongly by offering food to someone who doesn't have dinner.
Shelter.
That's
right.
And mental health care.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, this is the challenge for us is that how we are in that space. And I think you're saying, Johnny, the question a lot of the times is, what I've learned to do is to shut up. I can give you some food, I can pay attention to you, I'm going to ask the right questions, but it isn't my job to fix anything, it's my job to be there for you. And our chaplains work really hard at that, because sometimes the people, they're just, as you can imagine, they're just smashed. They don't know which ends up, and I think that the challenge of all those sorts of things, but at the same time too, there's some real signs of hope in those spaces, but I don't want to inflate hope to being something that's ridiculous. I actually mean it in terms of, someone's turned up and bothered to pay attention and to listen to what's going on for me and to say I'm valuable or to say I'm worthwhile. And they know the house is still gone, they know the crop's still gone or whatever, but that you're there for them and just listening,
Yeah. What do you think we should do? How can we help as not just being the church, but for any of our listeners being city people with lots of resource? Surely we can get our shit together to be helping on a large scale here.
Well, I don't know. I live in the countryside. It functions different kinds of ways, but it would seem to me that one of the things you could do is get hold of your local member and be saying to them what things are being done for these communities out there. What can we do? What can we agitate for? What's it look like? And that sort of stuff. Some concrete suggestions about. Obviously there are places you can give money, and that's fine. I'm all for the money, but it's also about agitating and saying, don't let this thing get wiped from the news. This is really important.
Yeah.
I was fascinated and appalled the other day. There's been this war going on in Eritrea and Ethiopia for the last 6 months. 500,000 people have been killed. Hasn't been on the news anywhere, haven't heard a word because the media hasn't covered it, right? In Tigray, this phenomenal... We hear about Ukraine, and Ukraine's incredibly important, but, with the news, we often have things that are just airbrushed from the news because someone decided it wasn't worth reporting. Because
there's no gas or oil there?
Could be, or maybe, I don't know. But in the same way with this disaster, which is a really big disaster, the question would be, how do we maintain this as being an important story? Because people will need housing, people will need shelter, they'll need to build rebuilding of communities. And this is, and I'm not having a go at the state government, but there's a state government responsibility. What are you going to do about this?
And they're going to need mental health care off the wazoo, post-traumatic stress after the loss of this in their lives and the family structure and the pressure on the families. It's just, it's off the charts.
Well, I was down in Eden after the fires 3 years ago. So we were during the fires down there. And they were saying there had been government grants for psychologists and counsellors, which is fantastic. So what psychologists and counsellors are getting in their cars and being paid to work down the south? And the answer was there weren't many. And so the government says, quite appropriately, we've given this money.
Yep.
How do you coordinate getting the 25 counsellors you need down there, funding them, housing them, clothing them, so they can do their job really well? Because there are all those logistical logistical problems that need to be addressed. So it isn't just handing out the cash; it's actually getting there and turning
infrastructure.
out.
That's right.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the government says, and I'm going to have a swipe here.
Yeah.
They're saying we care about your mental health, but by the way, you can only see a psychologist 10 times a year.
I've just halved it.
Only 10 times, guys, because you'll be fixed after 10 times. I'm just telling you, Simon. It took me a good 15 years to get remotely fixed and transformed, mate.
Yeah.
And that was every bloody week.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is that
they're dreaming.
Engaged in this conversation where it's measured by KPI of a number or a dollar. Numbers and dollars are important, but at some point you think some people will take a long time to be restored.
Yes.
And you think about, and I need to say, let alone looking after the staff who are doing these phenomenal things with the fires and the floods, etc. And I was talking to the Department of Primary Industries a few months ago, and they asked about getting some support for their workers, and we said, "What for?" Oh, they're the workers who are going onto farms and burning all the hives where the varroa mites been, with the bees, just killing the bees. And these workers go onto these farms and they're burning these hives that have been there for generations, and they have to do it because of the varroa mite. And they know they're destroying this farmer's history when they're doing this stuff. And the farmer knows it can't be helped. It's just awful space. And they were saying, can we provide care and support for these workers? Because they know they're doing this thing that has to be done, and no one's saying it shouldn't, but the actual emotional cost upon the people doing the job, let alone the farmer and the community around them. And as you know perfectly well, when you're living out in the farm, you're watching the smoke from your neighbour's farm and you know they're coming to your place next.
Yeah.
And
oh my gosh.
I mean, it just, this challenge, this is the thing, is like playing this game of you can constrain this problem by saying we provided the counselling or provided the session or provided the money, when sometimes restoring a community takes a generation.
Oh, yes.
It's hard. And going a bit traditional, this is why having the church in the community
is
or
critical.
the people of faith is really important.
Yeah. And I think we do really good clothing, feeding and sheltering in the church. Yeah. But I think a key element that we have missed is the mental health component, because we'll have to continue to shelter, clothe and feed people in need. And if we're not addressing the mental health component, it's just going to be a constant cycle. Yeah. I'm just so committed to doing that in our community.
Yeah, I mean, that's vital. I mean, what was interesting with this DPI thing with the varroa mite was that our coordinator, Stephen Robinson, is a fantastic guy. He'd be worth podcasting.
Yeah, he would.
And he said, "Oh, you mean you want psychologists?" They said, "No, we actually want chaplains. We want people who just provide pastoral care at the moment. We provide counselling," they said, for later on. "We need someone just here right now who just want to care for our people and listen to them." I thought,
beautiful.
Yeah, that's the church with the edgy stuff again. Which is
yeah,
quite
that's nice. That's triage on the spot, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's just,
it is.
It's like taking emotional blood pressure.
Yeah, and country people who get it, who understand this is what's going on.
Yeah, that's right. Because sometimes in trauma you actually need the real people that have really experienced the pain to hear your own pain. 100%. That's such a good conversation.
Yeah. I think like the thing that I'm sort of running through in my head at the moment is, so like, I always find it really confronting, when things like the flooding or fires become old news.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, how are we in a place where that's kind of like, that doesn't, I see it on the news and I'm like, oh yeah, more flooding. Like it doesn't evoke this reaction in me anymore. But also it takes, I have a really good mate that's probably listening, who now lives up near Grafton. And earlier this year, he'd just moved. And, we all saw the news, we all saw the flooding, but until I saw him swimming around his living room with his dog, that's when it was like, oh shit. Like that's really full on. And then same with the fires. Like we were the first real, I live in Australia, bushfires are a reality. 3 years ago, I'm down the coast south of Nowra in Jervis Bay for New Year's Eve. And all of a sudden we can't drive home because the roads are shut because there's crazy bushfires. And we're out on the beach at night on New Year's Eve because we couldn't go home. We tried to, right. And we're like, oh, look, you can see the lights of Nowra. It's like, no, that's fire. You could see the fire flickering around on the headland, and it's like when it's so easy to just not engage with it.
Yeah,
and it really confronts me. Like, why does it take such an up close and personal thing for us to engage with it properly? But part of it is also like you can't care deeply about everything because you'll get burnt out. So there's a balance there. I don't know how to square that circle.
And I think one of the blessings of the information age is we get a lot of information.
Yep.
One of the curses of the information age, we get a lot of information.
That's right. Yeah.
And you go, I don't need to know all these things. And you think, how do you survive? And you can get swamped. But sometimes too, I think often the solution might well just be, to use the old biblical language, caring for your neighbour, because we can't solve the fires. We can't fix climate change now. We have to start fixing it immediately, but we can't fix it now. So we've got to be saying, well, what do we do in that space, and how do we get involved? And like bringing it back to the gospel stuff, the gospel says, you get involved. I mean, the story of Christmas essentially is God saying, I'm getting involved. I'm turning up, and that's part of the challenge for us. Is how do we actually turn up? Often in the spaces where it seems least likely,
Yep.
Yeah, so.
It's a great conversation.
It speaks so clearly to what this podcast is about. Filthy hope.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think we've made hope about problem solved, and it's not.
No.
And hope's about turning up, and I think and. For us in the church trade, at some point we say some things will remain unresolved. How do we live our lives given that? And sometimes we think, well, and we've seen enough things in terms of conversations or prayer or things like that people's lives have been shifted and changed for sure, or offered forgiveness or received forgiveness or all those sort of things where things are shifted immediately. But there are enough large problems in the world to say, how do we live our life given that these things are happening and will continue to happen, and it's a real challenge.
Yeah, it is a massive challenge. Yeah, that's exactly right.
And not to be glib.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah.
So on that, I'm not shying away from the convo, but what I wanted to do was ask you then about 2023.
Yeah.
And what does that look like for you in terms of the church, and what are you looking forward to in the Uniting Church over the next year?
For me, I think, because I've been in this gig for a longer time than normal, and I want to say that that's been a great honour, and I feel, very honoured by doing that. But for me, I would want to be able to say at the end of my time, so I'm finishing in September, I'd want to say that we've actually shifted gears on how we resource ministry for the wider church. And I don't mean putting a minister in a pulpit, though it might be that. But how do we actually resource ministry where it needs to be, and how do we make those decisions more effectively? Like, the church has a history of saying, with blood, sweat and tears, we just changed this tiny thing. Okay, I'd like to make it a bigger than a tiny thing. I'd like to be saying, how do we actually recalibrate ourselves so that we put ministry where we need it? And it might mean 5 ministers in Penrith, or it might mean 2 ministers and a layperson in Dubbo. I don't care. I'm talking about how we actually recalibrate to say it isn't about who's got the dollars and cents. It's about saying, how do we get the money where we need it to be, and do it in a way that is about goodwill and hope, rather than, oh, look, you've got to prove X, Y, Z, A, B, C to get your stuff there. Now, obviously there are important questions to be asked, but the questions need to be about, are we offering life and hope in that space, and do we need to do it more, not how much money do you have, etc. It needs to be about the positive side. And if I can use my resources and my experience and my, I would hope, social capital, is that the kind of language we'd use here? Social capital to get that done, then I'm happy to do that. Because it's the larger missional question. You and I often heard this, Ness, but about the rural church and the city church live this inequitable life. And entirely understandably, but in terms of how we understand what Jesus was talking about, it needs to be more equitable. And how do we measure those things? Because I want to say really clearly, measuring mission in the biggest, fastest growing area in Australia, which is Parramatta and Nepean, and comparing that to measuring ministry in Eugowra, I don't know how you do that, but they're both really important. So how do we measure both those things equitably, and how do we say we need to move the money from A to B and from B to Z effectively and well and courageously? We live in a world, especially in the corporate business world, where we're avoiding risk at all costs. And the problem with God is the church is actually about risk. And how do we take? You're a risky kind of girl. How do we take risks that are actually about, to paraphrase, the risk of God in the world? I mean, without getting too preachy, the story of God at Christmas time is God risking God's self. And if you read the gospel story, especially the Gospel of Matthew, about the birth of Jesus, it's all shadowed by risk. Everything's at risk. The whole thing's at risk. It's a disaster. And any moment now, Mary gets bumped off for being an adulteress.
Yeah.
Joseph, marriage breaks down. The child dies from any one of the 1,000 diseases the baby's got in those days. They're fleeing to Egypt. The whole thing is chaos. Herod slaughters children under the age of 2. The whole thing is absolute carnage, and God's risking God's self in that space. Now, you can have a go at that being a fairy tale, which I don't believe. I think it's real. But the question is, how do we understand that God who risks God's self for us, what's that mean for the church to take risks in that space? Understanding itself. And the challenge is, it's hard.
Yeah.
But it needs to be a risk that we take with wisdom and with courage.
I had one of our powerhouses in the Uniting Church met with Jonty and I last week, and he said it's going to take half a dozen churches in the Sydney area to release funding and to redevelop their beautiful spaces that they've currently got, and to continue doing the mission that they're doing in their place, but to release the asset that they have for the wider good and the mission of the church. So that we can continue to be the hands and feet of Christ way into the next hundreds and hundreds of years. And do you know what that takes? And I'm watching it in my own community. It takes balls.
Yeah.
It really does. It takes bravery, it takes balls, and it takes a huge commitment to knowing that God's got this.
Yeah. And I think, sorry, absolutely.
And vision.
Yeah, and it also, so absolutely. And I think one of the things too is that it doesn't take blame and accusation.
No.
So we can go and say, why haven't you done this in the past? What are you doing? Or saying, what if you consider this opportunity about being here and there and giving mission and ministry in those spaces? And people go, could we do that? What if we gave it a shake?
Yes.
What if we gave it a shake? And I think, and this is the challenge, is that Australia apparently is one of the most generous countries in the world when crisis happens. And our wellness index goes up through the wazoo when there's a crisis on, because people can give money to the thing. That's a really positive response, which is great. But it isn't just about the chaos. It needs to be about how do we inherently become generous. And the church, as we both all know, has a great deal of resource. Not just human, but financial and property as well. How do we understand that in that context? And sometimes it's actually quite complicated. But like I said at the very beginning with my grumbly bit, let's begin thinking we can do this rather than here are 35 reasons why we can't.
We can't.
That's right. And it's also like, if you're in the middle, you got to be okay with seeing money and resources and time and stuff go to the edge where you may not see immediately the results on it.
What are the results going to be? I don't know.
I don't know. That's a really hard...
What will happen with this money? I can't tell you. We'll spend it.
That's right.
But it's interesting, with the disaster response chaplains, no one questions. The only question I ever get asked is, have you spent the money yet? When we give you money, have you spent it yet? People ring me up and they say, you're not put it in the bank, are you? You're not put that money in the bank. I'm going, no, it's in the bank right now because we had to put it through. But people say, you spend that money. You spend that money. And me going, I'm just throwing money at things. But people don't want it sitting there.
That's right.
They don't want me earning any interest. They want me throwing money at things, and I totally get that. I've given you I've had people give me $15,000 to my disaster fund. Incredibly generous, but they say you spend that money.
Please spend that money.
Yeah, and so we're putting a part-time chaplain in Ugara and that area next 12 months, hopefully, just to be there in the community, which is people's generosity, and it's great. But I mean, that's the question about the rural church and regional church, and it isn't just rural and regional; it's also Western Sydney.
Yeah.
Like for goodness' sake,
100%.
Yeah, it's growing.
Fastest growing area in all of Sydney.
Yeah, and how do we actually? And the thing is, and how you build community and ministry in Tamworth or Ugara is different to how you do it in those those new areas in Western Sydney, I don't even know the names of. They're growing up so fast. How do you build community there? It's a different conversation, but it's also about justice bringing. It's about hope speaking. It's about turning up. It's probably least about building a church and having a worship service on a Sunday.
Correct.
That'll be important too. It's about how do we just build
Be the community.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's very bloody exciting. We're really excited at Uniting Heart and Soul to be a part of this next phase of the Uniting Church, and I see it as a huge opportunity to be a blessing.
And I want to suggest to you, be a bloody pain in the arse.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Oh, I'm a pain in the arse.
I know.
Yeah.
I said it with my eyes wide open. But I mean, that's the thing is like...
I'm losing friends by the minute, mate.
But I think that's the thing is that we are so polite in the church, and someone says, "Oh, I've got $1 million. Oh, thank you. We're right, thank you." No, I want to give you my money. How can I give you this money? How can I be annoying enough, but also to say, I don't want it going into revenue. I want it spent on mission or ministry. I want it spent on the poor or the hungry. I want to build a community. I want to send a minister. I want to do this stuff and agitate. And I think there are enough people who just going to go, "Oh, we're glad you're agitating." But you just got to be, and I know you will. That's why I say it. But I mean, that's the thing is that like we do this thing eventually where we just write the check and go away. We don't want that. We want the church to say we've got a vision for how Uniting Heart and Soul or whoever Uniting Heart and Soul can support and resource ministry with no strings attached.
That's right.
For the rural church or the regional church or whatever it might be, and the church goes, how can we constrain that? Because it's the nature to constrain it, to be careful with the money.
Yep.
I mean, our parents and our grandparents grew up in a space where the depression and all that sort of stuff constrained how they spent and built. And I understand that.
Yep.
But we're in a different space now, and we need to be engaging in mission and ministry in ways that are different. And it probably means least building a church, but it certainly means establishing several, and how we do that effectively and well. And I mean, I'd be saying from the Uniting Church point of view, and we do it hand in hand with our Anglican, Baptist, Pentecostal, Lutheran, whatever colleagues to do this together, because the days of the badging, they're going, and our kids couldn't give a stuff.
No, they don't care about
Could not give a stuff.
No.
I mean, they might go Uniting Church first because that's what they grew up, but they'll go where they're welcome and safe and belong and encouraged. That's where they're going to go.
And where their community is.
Damn right. And my daughters, they know where they won't go. If they go somewhere and get told girls aren't welcome, they'll
That's
go,
right.
see ya.
Yep.
Thanks for playing. Can you sing in the choir? Nope. I've got somewhere else to go.
Yeah.
Amen.
And there are plenty of churches in the Western community, Western part of Sydney, for example, who want young people to come along and want to say you are welcome. You know, that's the space we need to be going and building. You know, so.
It's very bloody exciting.
I think there's this misconception sometimes that Christians are called to be nice people because Jesus was a nice person.
Yeah, you're talking to the wrong pair of ministers right here.
That's right. Jesus was a lot of things. He wasn't always nice. I think...
I'm a dodgy bastard.
But I mean...
sketchy asshole.
When we're talking about things that need fixing, being nice, it doesn't always cut it in terms of, like, you were talking about just being a pain in the ass. Like, and even when you mention, like, just, like, contacting your local member, I am such a firm believer in just bothering the shit out of them until they do something.
Yeah.
Because that's their job.
And a lot of them, in my experience, actually don't mind being told.
That's right.
It's a really important thing.
Yeah.
Rather than going, can we get all the compliance paperwork done? They're going to go, oh, you want me to do something?
Yes,
That's right, yeah.
You know, I can get involved. And I think that's the thing.
Yeah,
and
that's
in the
wonderful.
church too, like, as we all know, it's getting more and more compliance-based because the government requires.
Yep.
Like child safety.
Critical.
You've got to have that. No questions at all. And the insurance stuff, they're all really important things. But our core business isn't that stuff. It's important and we should do it and no question at all. But the core business of us is actually building community, offering hope and life to people who don't have hope and life in that space. There's a lovely prayer about when I was told I had no name and no place and no future, you offered me one.
Yeah, wow.
And that's our job. And I think if we can do that in a way that's actually about the future rather than just about the moment, that's really good for us, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. I talk about healing, wholeness and transformation, and many times, and tune out now if you need to and come back in 35 seconds, but I often talk about, Simon, the two things that saved my life were Jesus and therapy. And from a good dose of both of those, for many years, I saw transformation.
Yeah.
and God transformed me in that,
Yeah.
to the point where the little girl that was sexually abused as a 7-year-old, who had a radically out there growing up and young adult life, is now a reverend in the Uniting Church.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's through Jesus and therapy.
Yeah.
And a good community around me.
And transformation isn't this momentary flash.
That's
Sorry,
right.
it can be. But almost always it's about transformed. It takes time.
Yes.
I mean, there's interesting the word repentance in the gospel. One phrase is turning around, but another one is you get a new brain. Your brain gets renewed, and that takes time. To rewire your brain takes time.
Definitely. There's been a whole lot of neuro-linguistic programming that's gone on.
Absolutely.
Let me tell you. And it still is. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like it's a part of that whole process of sanctification, I suppose.
And I mean, we're in a culture that says, how do you save yourself? And that actually isn't my job. My job's to be thinking about how can I save you? How can I offer you life?
Yeah.
That's my job. And in the end, the gospel story says, at risk to myself, I'll seek to serve you. Now, that's a hard line to sell, but it's actually the job, And I think that's the conversation we want to be involved in. And for a congregation to think, what can we offer at risk to ourselves to provide life somewhere else is a really hard question, but it's actually the core business we're on about.
That is the core business.
I mean, there's a lovely line in our Basis of Union that says, we do not seek a continuing city, but seek one that is to come. We aren't about building empires here. We're actually about getting things to go. Yeah.
That's fantastic. It's
a great line.
Do you know what number that one is?
It's paragraph 1 or 2. Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Right at the beginning. It's beautiful, but it's that idea of we're not here for the property, we're here for the promise. Well, that's a good little line there.
Yeah, trademark that. Yeah.
Can we have that at Uniting Heart and Soul?
My new stubby holder.
That's right. That'll be on merch next year.
That's right. Yeah, after today, on merch.
Yeah.
Simon, it's been so good having you with us today. It's just been phenomenal.
It's been ball.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, what are you grateful for?
Well, to be typical moderatorial, lots of things, of course. But to be specific, I'm grateful for the surprises. They're the ones I'm most grateful for because I've been growing up in the church since I became a minister. So I've been since youth groups for a time, and I was forced to go to youth group and then into ministry, which is brilliant, and I love it. So you know the known things. You know the known things. You know who the good people are. You know who the good places are. You know where the good things are happening, that sort of stuff. And that's great. But when the surprises happen, that's what makes my heart beat. You know, when you meet the person who goes, like that person at the Art from the Heart, who just says thank you, and I think, or I meet someone whose life's been transformed in a way that I totally didn't expect, or I meet a person who's really hard to relate to, but has something really important to say, or I go to a congregation which I think is going to be like pumping up air into your tyre in your car, and it's not. It's actually a phenomenal gift, and I think the surprises for me have been those things that have been wonderful for me in being moderator, because I'm gregarious. I've been around for a bit of a while. I know people, and I thought I basically knew where the good spots were. And like a good paddock, when it's full of wheat after a good season, you know where the bumps which is true. But there have been some great surprises, some really, really good surprises, and I love being surprised. And the other thing I love too is being wrong.
Yes.
When I've said, that person isn't going to work, or this thing isn't going to happen, and I'm wrong. I love being totally proved absolutely wrong, because when it's a good thing happens and I think, love being wrong about that, and those moments are fantastic for me. And when I've prejudged and decided and I'm totally and utterly wrong, love it.
Do you love saying sorry?
Yes.
Me too.
And it's funny, people are surprised when you say sorry.
Oh, they are.
Oh, mate, they're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I go, at Synod a couple of years ago, so I said, for those who don't know, Synod's a really important meeting that we have every 18 months. And
Such a weird name, isn't it?
and I made I thought it was a pretty funny joke at the Synod, and most people laughed.
Yeah.
And the person who I was joking with and about saw it entirely as the joke, totally cool.
Yep.
One person came up to me and said to me, listen, found that a bit difficult. And I went, oh, really? Okay. And I went, talk to you one. I'm thinking, okay, righto. So I apologised. I said,
publicly?
Look, to the entire Synod. And I just said, listen, I think I may have screwed up. This is what And the guy who I joked with, he said he was totally not offended. He thought he was up for the joke, but he made that comment to me just fine. And I said, so I've done the wrong thing. I apologise for any. I shouldn't have said what I said. It's my fault. Boom. The number of comments afterwards of people saying to me, we've never heard a moderator apologise before, which I don't believe. But I mean, just coming and saying, thank you for apologising. And I'm going,
Whoa.
Right, okay. And I realised, gee, saying sorry.
It's powerful.
It carries
weight, doesn't it?
Yep. And people have said to me in times afterwards, I remember when you apologised at Sinai.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
The sermon? You remember the sermon? But like you're saying, Ness,
sorry's great.
It's got currency.
Yeah, it does have currency. That's a great way of describing it. Yeah. I've got pro formas set up on my laptop for I'm sorry letters for all different occasions.
You can just press send.
Well, I've had to say sorry a lot. Yeah. Certainly in ministry, don't I, Jonty? Because I get in trouble a lot. That's right. So I've become quite good at sorry. But I love it because it feels really...
Yeah, my lawyers have advised me. It
just feels authentic. There's something cleansing about a sorry. It's like it's a part of confession, isn't it?
Well, like in a wedding sermon, I often say to people, learning how to say you're sorry is really important.
Yes.
Right? And often people who have been married for a long time come up to me after the wedding and they go, we never hear that at a wedding. And I'm thinking, well, this is the core business. Like, this is the stuff. Like, I spent half my life while saying I'm sorry. And every time I'm wrong, I mean, I clearly am wrong. And I think how patient and gracious she is. And she'll say to me, yes. Let me move on. But it is. But that's the thing is, like, at its best, saying sorry is actually giving power to the other person and saying
100%.
That's right.
Will you forgive me? And I think that
and
that's why it carries.
That's confession, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And
that's why it feels so good.
Yeah, and it does. And it's risky.
Can be.
Yeah, we think, and I think it's a challenge. But sorry, I'm hogging the microphone again.
I had a similar experience with someone that I look up to a lot. Took something on the chest and got up in front of a whole bunch of other people that also look up to them and apologised.
Yeah.
And the whole room was like, whoa, this is unexpected. But all of a sudden it was just like this feeling of, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I'm trying to be vague because I don't know if they want to be talked about publicly, but like, all of a sudden, the vibe for the rest of that event just completely changed.
It changes the whole game.
So positive. Yeah.
And it changes the game in such a way because it, to use slogan language, it's countercultural.
That's right.
And you watch politics and there's no apologies. Yeah. Or the apologies have so many hairs on them that they actually don't mean anything at all.
Yep.
Where you go up and you say, I stuffed this. This is me. I was recently in a situation where a minister was talking to his congregation, and he got up, and there's a bit of a mess, but he got up and he said, "This is on me. This is mine. You want to blame somebody else? You're wrong. This is me."
Wow.
And the guts required for that, and the capacity required for that, and the congregation was like, he said, "I'm letting you know, this is me."
Wow.
Which I need to say was a gift because the congregation all went, right. So the problem actually isn't what we want it to be. It's actually over here and this person's owning up to it. And it changes the whole conversation. Like you're saying, Jonty, it just changes the whole... I'm pointing at Jonty. It changes the whole conversation. And it moves you to the space of going, okay, this person's owned it. How do we fix it then? Rather than hanging on the
powerful.
Stuff. Yeah.
Really powerful stuff.
Yeah. We should wrap it. Because
Right.
we've been, we'll have you back in the new year at some point.
I'd love to come back,
because I feel like we just got started. There's so many other things we want to chat about.
We'll show those images that you shared off camera that you shared with me. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
So people can get a really good visual of.
So that's a church, Dandaloo. Dandaloo is a single church in a big paddock. And look up Dandaloo, Dandaloo, on your Google Maps. And I led worship there 2 weeks after the photograph was taken. In a dried out, so really exciting.
Yeah, and I was saying before, I played lawn bowls and drank beers with my mates in Yagara.
Yeah.
Like 4 months ago. Yeah, and you see it on the news. You almost just don't
sense of
recognize
place.
it. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for your time. You've been super generous.
Been a hoot.
Thank you so much.
So much fun.
And you were so well behaved, which is a bit surprising to me.
I don't think I said fuck once.
Well, there you go.
Thank goodness we heard it now. The whole room deflates.
It was only because Simon was here.
That's right. Well, every so often we get to like closer and closer to the end. I'm like, I may not have to click the explicit tag on this one.
I was saying how I'd be going.
That's right.
the naughty words came out, but I ran out. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that just about does it. Thanks again.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Simon.
I believe this will probably be our first one for the year when this comes out. So hope listeners and viewers had a wonderful Christmas break. You're back to doing whatever it is you're doing in your day-to-day life. We'll see you next week. I'm Jonty.
I'm Ness.
We've had Simon Hansford. See you next week.
Great to be here.
Ciao. Thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, you can support us by leaving a 5-star review for the show on your chosen podcast platform. This really does help us to cut through to new audiences more efficiently and helps to get the algorithm a little bit more onto our side to suggest our show to new listeners when they're looking for new podcasts. Honestly though, the best way that you can support this show is just by telling your friends about it. So if there's someone you know who you think would enjoy listening to the show, take this as your prompt to go and tell them about it. You can find us on socials, or you can get in touch with us more directly by emailing filthyhopepod@gmail.com. That's all for this week. We'll see you again very soon. But until then, always remember, take Jesus seriously and don't be a dick.